Michael Ketchen, episode 4 with a good special guest. Matthew Hitchcock's back and Ian Bishop. Ian, thank you for coming up.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you here. We just got done our session. So Ian is our how do you describe yourself? What are you self-described as?
I help entrepreneurs, small business owners build custom operating systems and coach their COO, director of ops manager.
It's a really fancy way to say a very good consultant for business operations. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, basically, like I just noticed that like most entrepreneurs, like CEOs are just like born that way, right? Like they just...
What do you mean they're born that way?
Like they don't go and get a particular degree to become an entrepreneur, right? There's like some hardwiring involved, I think. There's some like life experience, hardwiring. The guy that goes and gets an MBA isn't on the trajectory to become like a real estate investor, an entrepreneur that's going to go start something and like play that risky game. Conversely, in the C-suite, you're going to have like a CFO that goes to school to get an accounting degree, become a CPA, all that. But for operators, COOs, there's no like path for them other than experience. And so
that's an interesting takeaway.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so my experience was, I've been a part of growing a few different businesses and felt like, I know how to go from here to here. And there's a lot of people out there that don't, and so I can accelerate that learning for COOs, director of ops that are trying to do that.
You're accelerating the fuck out of us. And I'll tell you that right now. We had our session today, and I feel like I'm still feeling the pain. I don't know how you feel. I'm still...
Yeah, no, it just seems like there's a lot of work to still be done,
Yes.
which we knew. And I was saying earlier, I mean, we've gone through iterations in our business where we hit a wall and we have to kind of figure out and recalibrate. And then we're going through the next, right now, reiteration. We're trying to calibrate and get to that next level. And that's why we have to hire someone like Ian to come in and help us out.
If you want to feel like you're absolutely terrible at business, just hire Ian, because he'll
Very
show
fair.
you all your warts real quick.
And you guys are super prototypical. There's stair steps, right? Like guys get stuck at 1 to 3 employees, where it's like, you've got a VA, an admin assistant, but like you don't have any like revenue generating employees. And so usually there's like some limiting beliefs there where people get stuck and they don't see employees as revenue generating. They just see them as an expense. And then once you break through that, you get to the stage where you're somewhere in like 7 to 15 employees. But you also have a stair step there where guys hit a ceiling because they can't hold more people than that accountable. So they run into like a managerial leadership problem. And I think this is like an epidemic where entrepreneurship has thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to anything corporate. And so managers, leadership development, meetings, trainings, all this are like, we don't need that. And then all of a sudden the business starts growing and they're like, oh, this sucks. And they have all these problems and they can't figure out how to solve them. And it's like, remember all these things that kind of tried and true that worked. And so I think there's a big void right now with leaders and managers, and entrepreneurs grow their business and they hit that stair step where they don't know how to train people. They don't know how to hold more people accountable. They don't know how to develop leaders. And so then they have that another plateau at like 15. Because what happens is you have to reinvent the business to go from 1 to 3 employees to then get to that level. So you got 15. To go from 15 to 25, you're also adding in some layers of accountability, right? And you're having to reinvent the business a little bit. But the business at 25, in my opinion, doesn't look that much different at 125.
So you feel like that's the breakthrough, because where we're at right now with full-time and part-time, we're right in that at 10 to 15.
Yeah.
Probably actually 15 you added part-time when I think about it that way. But like what I've been telling people, one of the reasons I was excited to have you on, I've told Matt, like...
You've been telling people that?
Well, I wasn't excited to have you on. I was telling people, No, I think I'm a really good real estate investor. And what I tell people is I'm learning to be a business owner. And it's very different. And I think that might shock people when they're starting the journey. But like you just said, like we went from us doing everything where you can control the outcomes, you can control the stresses, to you build a system that works through your lens. And I saw this kind of firsthand education. I talked about it, but even we still weren't prepared for it. Whereas now it's like, I'm trying to take my urgency, my vision, my system, and I'm trying to get that into an employee's mindset to move with, Dan Martell, who I know you're a big fan of, great book, Buy Back Your Time, check it out if you haven't, says it where with an employee, 80% of anything is 100% awesome. And that is such a mindset shift for an entrepreneur who's used to like we've got to optimize. We've got to optimize. And we're trying to get comfortable being uncomfortable with that 80%. And that's what's led to our work with you. I guess I feel like there's two people in the world of coaching. There's two entrepreneurs. There's those who get it and those who are ready for it. And this is my opinion. I've never asked you this. Never asked you this. And there's other people like, coaching, it's a fucking scam. You don't need it. Yada, yada. I can go on YouTube. Like we have a buddy who's like, I don't need coaching. I can go on YouTube and watch a David Goggins video and run through a wall. And then says, why are you guys so successful? We say, well, go get coaches. Well, I don't need coaching because I can watch a David Goggins. It's like, okay, well, shout out. He knows who he is. What would you say back to those people who are anti-coaching?
I was very much that way for years. I was like, why would I pay somebody for this information when I can just go buy the book?
God bless your wife. I don't know if she puts up with your shit. I really don't. That's a separate conversation.
But it wasn't until I had an experience from being in a mastermind where I was like, oh, I'm accelerating because of the information, the community, like being around these people.
Yep.
And then I hired a coach, and it was like, oh, again, I'm accelerating. And so I at one point had 3 coaches because via the experience was just like, man, I want to get better at this specialization. I'm going to hire a coach for that. I want to get better at this specialization. I'm going to hire a coach for that. So for somebody who's anti, it's like, don't knock it till you try it, but information doesn't change people. Experience does. So they have to actually experience it and see some fruit from it to then be able to change their mind, in my opinion.
I think they just have to want it too, right? Like,
you got to be open-minded to some extent.
I train jiu-jitsu and I have a coach. Like I could go online and watch a bunch of stuff, but if I'm not interested in jiu-jitsu, why am I going to go pay a coach for that? Maybe I'm mildly interested and I watch a couple things and I just try and learn on my own. But if I really want to excel and get to the next level, I got to hire someone professional to really teach me what I need to know.
It shortens that learning curve, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have the Grant Cardones and the Tony Robbins of the world that have like these big mega conventions and people go and they get the rah-rah for like a weekend, but it's just like a glimpse of it. And then are they actually going to run through the wall when they get back? Or are they just going to stop when they get home after like the weekend because they forgot about all the magic that was at the event? And they didn't go ahead and hire them as an additional coach or reach out to someone that has a similar skill set to learn those things to teach them. So.
That's the thing. Like it always blows my mind. We say all the time. It's like the more successful you become, you realize the less you know. Like you get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And I always feel like it's the people who are like just starting their journey or they're so in their own way and it's all how they show up. They think they got the answers. It's like, well, if you show up thinking you've already arrived, right? Like we don't have to do that. We could have rested on our laurels. We don't have to pay a consultant and a coach like Ian. We don't have to go to masterminds. Shout out to the 50, the one I'm part of. We're putting ourselves as Commonwealth Collective purposely in positions to get uncomfortable because what we believe comes on the other side of it. That's a different, how do you speak to that mindset? Like as entrepreneurs, we're wired that way, but you said something a while ago. What is the mindset of a COO or somebody you work with to how do you push through that uncomfortableness to know what's on the other side? How do you sell that vision to them?
I don't know if it's necessarily the uncomfortableness because I think the good ones already have a knack for it. Like they want to. Now, I think there's a stubbornness sometimes of like, I know better.
Yeah.
Right? If you get too high level.
Entrepreneurs are stubborn. That would have never, I mean, that might be the biggest shocker on the internet in 2024.
Yeah.
Go back, watch that clip on YouTube again. Entrepreneurs are stubborn. Ian Bishop, this is what you pay him for. This is
hence why they don't have bosses.
Yeah. That's.
But even at a
I had no problem with authority growing up, none at all.
At an operator level,
Yeah.
right? Like you could have 2 guys that are high level operators. They could be slightly different where one guy might be more keen to like data and information and the other guy might be more relational. And so if they were both given the same problem, one of them is going to call people that he knows who have gone through that to try to glean from their experience. The other guy is going to research the heck out of it and try to figure out all the details around it. They're both going to think they're right. And they both could be, right? But I think they both have a knack for it. They might just go about it in a different way. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, my thesis is that there's 4 parts I see over and over again. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but there's the vision, which is the what. There's the strategy, which is the how. And so a lot of language of like EOS would say visionary and integrator, business owner and operator. But really where I see the breakdown is after the strategy is implementation. And then after implementation is the ongoing execution. So it's these 4 parts where you have vision, strategy, implementation, and then ongoing operations or execution. And there's usually not 4 separate people for those 4 roles. So the business owner typically is the vision. They decide, here's what we're going to do. They like to dabble usually in a little bit of the strategy, like high level strategy. And we talked about this at one of your properties yesterday where it was like, you walked in, you're like, oh, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to add 2 more units here. And I was like, I asked you a couple questions. You were like, I don't know, because I checked out after that. I came in, I said, we're going to do these 2. And then
here's the
you
big
guys
vision,
figure
baby.
it out.
Go on the roadmap. We got to get here by this date. Leave me the fuck alone.
And so that's where then that handoff occurs typically at strategy, as somebody else then steps in for the details of the strategy. But at that point, everything is still theory. Like nothing's real yet. It's all just ideas in our head.
Yeah.
So there has to be somebody who then implements. And this is where I think a lot of this gets lost is implementation is taking the unseen, making it real, putting a shovel in the ground, having something to show for it. And once that's created, it's like the guy that builds the race car. Once it's created, you're then going to put a driver in the seat to drive the race car. And that's your operator. A lot of times in business, though, we lump implementation and operations together. We say, oh, that's operations. That's my ops guy. That's my COO, whatever. And we put those 2 together and we assume that they can do both. But it's a very different skill set to build and implement something than it is to just run the playbook, right? Like the guy who creates the playbook, the coach, very different than the quarterback that's going to go out and execute the playbook. And so this is where I think it's a unfortunate overlap where those 2 get lumped together and they're really 2 different roles. And so that's usually where I come in is I am the strategy implementation guy. And so I fit in in the middle between a business owner and their operator where the handoff just isn't quite smooth yet. And the operator would do really, really well if plugged into a system, but the system doesn't exist. The visionary doesn't know how to create the system, doesn't want to, but they want to support their operator and they want to get them help. And the operator would be really, really good if they had that system to operate within.
Yeah. And
which is what happened with us. Like
100%
bringing you on, like Mike and I just, based off of what we had in our brains, we just lumped everything together. We thought this is how it was. And we thought it was very clear just because we have a different type of relationship working together, building the business together.
Because we own the company too,
with Hannah.
Right?
Correct.
There's no urgency when me, Matt, and Hannah have to do something. There's no other choice.
Yeah.
There's no paycheck.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then you coming in and really asking, nice thing is you came in and you weren't like, this is completely wrong. You just asked a lot of probing questions that got us to a different way of thinking.
Yeah, I always say, like, you know your business better than I do.
Yeah.
And so I'm just here to be a guide. You have a lot of the answers already, but you just haven't come about them yet. And so asking some of those questions, like I know we've had a conversation we were talking about earlier of like, I agree with you, but how do we prove it? Like, how do we like objectively prove that this is working or not working? Because then we can validate it to then recreate rather than just like running the business by feel, because I can't teach somebody else to run the business by feel. I mean,
it's not scalable, which is what we're trying to do. And in our head, we were like, this is scalable because we just do it inherently.
Well,
but it's not.
you have a built-in motivation as the owners.
Yeah.
But this even goes back to, it's funny because I don't know, I'm sure Matt remembers. We had many conversations. I don't know if he remembers in the moment, but I think he's feeling it now. When I came from education, I watched, they remodeled our model. We went from a small school to a large school. And we had a model that was proven. We were winning awards. And then overnight, literally overnight, when they changed it, it crumbled. And I remember the way my brain worked, the way I looked at it, I remember talking to our leader at the time, our principal. I said, this is not going to work. You've romanticized, because we were a finished product, you forgot how hard it was. And now we have a different challenge. We have triple the number of students. We have a staff that used to be bought into the vision because they came here with clear expectations. They chose to come here. Now they're forcing. They gave us another school overnight. We inherited their staff. I was like, we have to change some stuff what we're doing. And he wouldn't. He was stubborn to a fault because it worked. And looking back, I think it came from a place of fear. But I remember telling you and Hannah, even when we first started, I'm like, we have to think with the end in mind. Which at the time, I didn't even know what the hell that meant. Looking back, I would do things different. But I knew enough to say, when we get to where we want to get to, it's going to be. Are we like he used to answer like Google Voice? Like Matt's a savage. Matt's an owner. Matt would be leasing apartments at 1 a.m. And I used to tell him, I was like, this is great for right now, but there's very slim chances we find somebody to lease apartments at 1 a.m. on a Saturday. Like, you're just built different. You own the company.
Yeah.
So how do we put that down so we find a person that will be, as Dan Martell says, 80% of 100% of Matt? It's been hard. It's an ongoing challenge. But like, I want to go back to what you said before, because I don't think it gets talked about in real estate enough. Everyone says, like, you hear the cliche, you make your money on the buy. You do, but you preserve your wealth on the execution. And operations is so big. I see a niche, and I don't know how many real estate investors you're working with or not. I remain amazed at, to me, the real power of real estate is the repeated cash flow, the cash out refi, the long-term appreciation. That all comes from your operations. I continue to be amazed at how many real estate investors are bad operators. Do you see a niche and an inefficiency in this market based on the experiences you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes back to a conversation we had a couple months ago where I think I look at it like an equation, right? You've got the strategy times the execution. Like and this is my original thesis before I added in like the vision and the implementation, how it all kind of fits together, was you've got the strategy times the execution, and that's going to give you your result. And so over time, as the result goes up, can we correlate directly? Is it because we're executing better, or is it because our strategy is getting better? And I think there's an inefficiency around execution where, to use your term, you cover up some warts.
Yep.
Where you are getting better as the business
you were
owner.
Gonna say wicked smart. I was like, we don't say fucking wicked smart up here. Okay, why?
Wicked smart.
We don't say that in Boston. He thinks everyone says that. But that's where I thought you were going with it.
I'll give you a quick tangent. So we were, I think
Too
it was
many Ben Affleck films.
I think it was the second 50 meetup, and Mike gets up and he says he starts to talk about something. He goes, but I'm not that smart. And me and Matt Francois, shout out Matt, both of us in unison go, nah, you're wicked smart.
Yes. And this is when I realized I paid tens of thousands of dollars to join a mastermind with idiots. This is when this happened. So thank you. Shout out Brandon Turner for putting this together with these wicked smart guys that you're putting out there. I have to get Brandon on the podcast at some point.
But yeah, I think there's an inefficiency built in where as the business owners, you're incentivized to get better. You get better at the strategy, but are we measuring the things that matter to be able to, like we talked about, objectively be able to say, can we prove that our execution is getting better? If we've put people in place to execute, can we prove that they're getting better over time, right? That from the first building we bought to the most recent building we bought, where we had a team in place, are they getting better at executing? Are our timelines getting shorter? Are we coming in under budget? Like, are we measuring anything that we can point to and be like, yep, they're getting better at this? And I think a lot of times there's not. And what it really is that the business owner is getting better at different strategy components. And so the result is better. And so we just see the result and we're like, we're getting better. Everything's all good.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. And I think that's the pitfall we're trying to avoid. Is, again, we don't want to rest on what got you here won't get you there. But I also think one thing we're struggling with, there was even a conversation we had before we came on air, are we now overcomplicating it? Do we go back to, like, does Matt do the training to then give it, this is the exact way I want it? Are you better off letting them create it? Like, are we going too far in the left field now? Do we got to bring it back to center? So it's that balancing act, right? And what we try to anchor ourselves with, and I think a tip everybody should do if they're not doing it, is what is your time worth? Right. And that's what we always talk about. Like, I have the hourglass analogy where, whatever you want, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 50,000, whatever it is, figure out on that, your decision making as the entrepreneur, and figure out what your threshold is. And what I try to do, for example, is I'm trying to stay above the $1,000 an hour task. We're trying to delegate that out. Because if I'm working, and this is back to what we said earlier, and I think this is a fine line I love both your inputs on, is how do you not get sucked back into that comfortable, warm place where it's like, I want to go fix the relatively minor problem, but it's a problem and I don't like it, versus, okay, well, every minute I take to fix that, because that's the pushback, right? Again, self-managing and all that. Well, now you're not growing, you're not doing deals. What would you say in response to something like that? If someone comes and says, well, I don't need to worry about operations because I need to grow the business, and inefficiencies be damned.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time there's a need to be needed.
What do you mean?
From the business owner.
You're saying I have psychological issues?
You're
attacking me right now?
An ego piece at play, right?
I feel like he's talking to me, man.
There's a quote.
Bring the fucking guy on.
Phrase,
he's attacking me.
There's a quote,
Speaking
phrase,
of
whatever it is, that says the more valuable you are to the business, the less valuable the business is. And so I think a lot of times guys jump in like that, and it's based out of a need to be needed, and they're fulfilling some kind of like ego or something within them that the business is giving them. It's not as, black and white objective as how do I increase the value of the business, right? And this is something I always refer to as like, in the cash flow quadrant of Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yep.
The difference between being self-employed versus owning a business is self-employed is you own a job. Owning a business is you own a system. And so a big part of what I do is I help business owners build the system, right? And depending on the business, it might look a little different. It's not cookie cutter. So if someone doesn't want to do that, from a numbers standpoint, it's like how you always harp on NOI and what that dollar is actually worth.
Yep.
It's like if we actually break out the math, it might not actually make sense for you to jump back in and do those things. And so is this actually feeding some other kind of need in terms of ego and you getting something out of this?
I agree. And that leads me to a great follow-up question, because The Cash Flow Quadrant, great book, Robert Kiyosaki. If you haven't read it, you should. It's the second book after Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm very much an I. Like, I'm very much in the investor quadrant. Everything I do, I start with the question of how do I not pay for this and do I work backwards? We've intentionally built the lifestyle. What we're trying to work through is we're trying to fire ourselves. Our goal was always to fire ourselves. Our goal is to not, and this is one of the struggles. So we're gonna solve this. It's gonna be a psychology session right here on a podcast. One of the things I'm struggling with is how do we get to the goal where we're making, I mean, it's even crazy numbers to say out loud, but where you're making $1 million a month in profit. Your owner's draw is $1 million a month plus, while bringing in people to grow that when it was your work ethic and your vision that got you there. Like, that's, we have another mutual contact, the mastermind, that I admire, because it's like he's essentially done, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's working 40 hours a week. I think he's kind of removed himself. I'm trying to get there, and I have been amazed. Like, it sounds so easy to say. You're like, yeah, of course I do less. I give it. It is very hard, because there's that trust piece. There's all that. How do you help me get there, Ian? How do I get there? How do I, like a day like today where we had the team, we had the debrief. Now we've got these 50 problems that need fixing. We're personally guaranteeing the millions of dollars. What would you say to somebody who's trying to get there? Because it's our name on it. But to your point, if we step back in and we solve these problems, that's great. We solve the problem.
We gave ourselves a job.
Exactly. And now we're not buying new deals. We're not raising capital. We're slowing down, firing ourselves. How do you handle that?
Basically, like, how do you transition from like kind of like loosening your grip a little bit?
You think my grip's pretty tight? Is that what you're saying? You know this is going to be recorded. Like, people listen. People are watching this, so you better watch out, because now everyone's going to see you attacking.
I'm just no. I'm just trying to clarify the
Send
question.
it to Bianca. Yeah, what I'm saying is, you now know where we're at. We're trying to fire ourselves. We're trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
While still having your name and your brand. How do you do that? Because what we know, what we want to do right now is focus on capital raising for our investors, because a lot of our investors are friends and family. They're people that are in these deals that we're trying to bring them on this journey with us now. That's one of the reasons we moved to our syndication model, the way it's structured, was to bring friends and family with us. How do we, knowing that's the best use of our time, how do we get comfortable firing ourselves and letting, like, for example, the session we had today, should we let our director of operation and you figure it all out? Should we step back when you're the visionary side of the company? How do you handle that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is another like big mistake people make is they read the book or they see the YouTube video or whatever and they're like, oh, I just need to be completely hands off, and they go so extreme from one end to the other and they don't have like a progression plan, right? So like one of the things
gradual release.
Yeah, that gradual release, and that's why I asked like the death grip, right? Because it's gradual. Like one of the methods that I was taught was, let me show you how I do it. Let me see you do it. Now you go do it. And so it creates this progression, not only tactically of someone learning the skill, but also like trust wise, where you get some reps in to be able to be like, okay, you see how I'm doing this. Let me explain it. Let me teach you how. Okay, now let me see you do it. Nope, not like that.
Yeah.
Okay, no, hold on. You not like that. Like, and you can correct somebody along the way. And then it's like, okay, go do it. Check back in with me. How did it go? Now that you were all by yourself.
Teaching,
it's almost like
for understanding. That's
it's
what
like
you used to call it in teaching.
Yeah, if you were like teaching a 16-year-old how to drive a car,
yeah,
you wouldn't expect them to have never gotten in the car and just like jump in a driver's seat, right? They're going to sit in the passenger seat and you're going to talk through like, hey, see how the light's turning yellow? I'm going to start to slow down right now. Like, you're going to process some of that stuff out loud so they understand.
Yeah.
Right? Then you're going to sit in the front seat while they drive. And you're going to be like, hey, make sure you put your blinker on. Hey, look over here. Hold on. Come to a full stop. Like, you're going to walk them through that. And then one day you're going to give them the keys and be like, okay, just like go to the store and come back, like 5-minute trip. Okay. And then you're going to like, they're going to come back and how did that go? Okay, good. Okay. Now go to the other side of town, 15 minutes. Okay. Come back. How did that go? Right. And like, you're going to like kind of baby step it. And so I think a lot of people don't set up that progression and instead just go like all in on, well, this is what I should be doing. I'm just going to let go completely.
Yeah. And that goes against so much conventional wisdom. And I kind of agree with you because what we're uncovering, we went from an extreme to an extreme. And that's kind of what we're wired to do. We go fast. I mean, like I told you, like we've doubled our staff in the last 12 months. We've doubled our payroll. Now the portfolio's grown, so you can say, and I feel like that's where you get a lot of, well, why change anything? Look, you're growing, you're doing all these buildings. Okay, well, eventually though, what you're breaking is gonna bite you a little bit, right? I mean, would you agree with that? Do we almost need to slow down a little bit? Like, what advice would you give to people trying in our position right now?
I think that we could slow down to an extent. I think it's like kind of like it kind of reminds me about when we first started. We had our W-2 jobs plus we were doing this. So it's almost like now we have to think, all right, we still want to do the entrepreneur side and not have a job, but we still have to be semi in the weeds a little bit for that handoff that we're trying to accomplish. And then once we get there, now we can remove ourselves.
Because you're building that foundation at a scale. In theory. That's what I feel like we're doing. I feel like we're laying the new foundation, and it's a little messy, right? Sometimes you got to knock down a wall and really the brick.
Yeah, it's
like
very messy.
Like I said earlier, like you have to relearn how to run the business, right? We were talking about another friend of ours where, his first business, he was intricately involved in it. He was in the weeds. Like he self-admittedly was like, I was the cog, I was the bottleneck, but because of that, he knew how to make all the decisions. He had total confidence in it. Right? In his new business, he has an operator in there. He's not as familiar with the niche. And his words were, I don't have my foot on the gas, but I also don't have my foot on the brake. I'm just kind of hovering because things are going well, but I don't know if I should floor it right now because I'm not so intricately involved that I know things are going to keep going well. Yep. And so he's having to relearn how to run his business off of trusting that he has the right people in place, leading them well, managing them well, and then looking at data and making decisions objectively based on how we're executing. Can I keep doing this, or do I need to jump back in, or do I need to correct this? Because I don't know that jump back in is necessarily the solution. I think sometimes it's just a learning process. You're like, oh, well, that didn't work, so let's try it a new way.
Yeah.
Which is how we built our company. We just learned as we went. We didn't know how to do any of this stuff.
Yeah. Shit done.
People do it all the time with hiring. Yeah. They make a bad hire and they're like, it doesn't work. I'm never having employees again. Like, I'm not doing it. It's like, no,
he's talking to us right now.
Not every hire is going to be perfect, And so it's like, yeah, you make a bad hire. Great. What did you learn from it? Like, there has to be a reflection or a self-awareness to go. And this is where back to your question around like coaching is like, sometimes that's the banter that you need to be able to go like, oh, here's what I did. And you have somebody slow you down and say, well, hold on. What went well? What didn't go well? Yep. Well, was that a reasonable expectation? What expectations did you set? Like,
yeah,
I think sometimes people prematurely are just like, oh, no, this doesn't work. And they just can the whole thing.
So that's a perfect transition actually to what the work we did with you that I wanted to get into before we wrap up and get out of here. We met because I was in this mastermind, a couple really successful people told me, you go around, you say, what pain point are you dealing with? And I kept saying, hey, do we scale? How do I step back? How do we scale and give up control? And everyone kept saying this EOS thing. I don't know what the fuck EOS was. I was like, all right, well, if these really successful people who are much further on the journey than we are, I mean, these guys are approaching, 9-figure net worths, right? They're saying do this. Well, then you're there, you're a coach. I talked to you. I like the way you kind of presented stuff, I like the way you broke down information. What is EOS? Because when we went home, we took it. Now, it's changed our business, but I kind of want you to answer because you can speak to it more. But for me, I like the clarity it's given. What is EOS? Do you think every business should have EOS? Or are there other systems that are out there? It's more just about a system. So like a two-part question. What is EOS? And is EOS the end-all be-all? Or are there other systems that it's more important to have a system than just EOS?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer them in the opposite order. I think everybody has a system to an extent, whether they call it something or not.
Yeah.
They may have the chaos system or the
we
reactive.
Definitely had the chaos.
We had the chaos system.
The chaos system.
Or the reactive system or whatever you want to call it. But I think everybody to an extent has something. I think it's more so about having a plan. And so being proactive in it. EOS is entrepreneurial operating system. And so I was very fortunate to be a part of multiple growing businesses, and I was very much so on the operations side. What makes me kind of unique was I was in a lot of sales-based businesses, and so I approach operations from a revenue standpoint, whereas a lot of operations coaches, consultants sometimes can fall into the trap of like operations for the sake of operations.
Yeah.
It's, it's almost like meetings for the sake of meetings.
Yeah, no, we want to be lean and mean. We don't want any of that shit.
Yeah. And so I was always very fortunate to be a part of business where I had exposure to the sales side, the revenue side, but I was very much so I was the how guy. And so I had a counterpart was the what, he was the vision, I was the how. And so I got to go through that multiple times in learning how to do it. And when I discovered EOS, it put language to what I was already doing. And I was like, oh, like there's terms for this stuff.
That's interesting. So you inherently were doing some of this, and EOS gave you the clarity around.
Yeah. And so EOS is essentially, and a lot of these operating system companies are built off of scaling up. Which was kind of like the original book on it. And it's like a textbook. It's not a fun read. It's not easy to apply to your business. And so EOS did a really great job of branding, making it applicable, putting language to it that like entrepreneurs could grab onto, plug in, and kind of laid a little bit of the roadmap. Once I discovered that, I went through the trainings to become a certified EOS integrator, went through the implementer workshop, and started working with businesses in a consulting role using a lot of these tools. But what I found was some businesses, it worked really, really well. Other businesses, it fell flat on its face.
What were the ones that fell flat?
So like, for instance, with you guys, anything that has project management in it, it's very difficult to apply like the routine cadence that EOS encourages. Like project management is very different than just like the annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly type stuff, right? So I took that and I took a lot of those frameworks and I applied that with clients, and then I found the shortcomings and went like, oh, this needs to be customized. This needs to be custom tailored. And that was a big reason why I didn't so EOS, you can become a franchisee. And I'm not a big fan of franchises to begin with, but it was one of the reasons that I didn't was because as a franchisee, you have to go through the protocol. Whether it applies to your business or not, I still have to walk you through these protocols.
That's not the way business
And
works.
I was like, if I were on the receiving end of that, I would be frustrated. That doesn't make any sense. And so I didn't feel the conviction behind it, but I was like, man, there are a lot of good tools here that I could still utilize. And so I basically just expanded my toolkit using a lot of their frameworks, adding in some of my own, adding in things that I had experienced, as well as, other resources, Dan Martell, things like that. And so that's where the customization side came from was entrepreneurs. Yeah, they need some kind of operating system, but is it this specifically? Like, is it that cookie cutter? It depends on their business. Yeah. Like as the real estate investor world, like it's too custom. It's too crazy.
It is.
Like there's
on a
there's
daily
too
basis,
much
monthly
nuance.
basis.
Well, you deal with people too, right? You're dealing with people's housing at the end of the day. And that's the easy part to forget. It's like, as much as we try to make this like a data-driven decision, you're still dealing with the ultimate variable, which is humans. I mean, you just look at the maintenance calls that come in. Look at the crazy shit. Look at the government agencies you got to deal with. But it's been great. I mean, it's given me a lot of clarity. I'm sure the scorecard's giving you a lot of clarity on what we're doing. With that said, before we get you out of here, where can people get a hold of you?
I dabble a little bit on Instagram, LinkedIn.
Dabble. Who says I dabble?
Ian Bishop, the RevOps Coach, therevopscoach.com. And again, that just comes from doing ops-based, operational consulting.
Do you own that URL? I'm going to go buy that URL.
I do, yeah. Therevopscoach.com.
I think we should have got that. As soon as it made his Instagram, we should have bought that.
Oh,
just
you
to
don't
fuck with him.
Who are you talking to?
Yeah.
You don't think I made sure that I had the URL, the Instagram, all the things before it went public?
So the RevOps Coach.
The RevOps Coach, yeah. The idea is that I focus on operations, but from a revenue perspective. Yeah. And I think that's the slight misalignment that comes in sometimes with operational consulting is operations isn't a sexy sell. The way I explain it to like real estate investors is everybody wants a double or a triple. Like from whatever your current numbers are, like everybody wants either a profit or a revenue or gross revenue or gross profit. Like they want a double or a triple from where they're at. Like nobody's happy where they're at. In order to do so it's like you have a single story house. Everybody wants to add a second or a third story. But before we can do that, we got to make sure the foundation can support it. And so operations is coming in and going, are there any cracks in the foundation? Do we need to reinforce it? Can it carry this much weight? It's not a sexy sell, but it's what allows you to do the double or the triple. And so you stack sales and marketing on top of the operations work that you do.
Yep.
And now you can attain that double or that triple.
100%. And when this does come out, I can't recommend working with you enough. I will continue to say it. Anybody who's listening to this is probably listening because they're interested in being a real estate investor or they follow along. You're going to get, if you stick with real estate, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have a decision to make. And that decision is going to be very simple. It's going to be, am I going to turn this into a business where I get all the benefits, or am I going to stay strictly on the investment side, which that means if you're strictly an investor, that means you're giving up a lot of control. You're giving up a lot of optimization. And when you apply NOI, which I'm always talking about, to a cap rate, like we talked about, at a cap rate of 5, every dollar of NOI is worth 20. So if you can move your NOI, if you bring it in-house, and this is something we've talked about, I think people get it wrong. If you can boost your NOI by 5% by self-managing, do that on a multiple of $20 at a 5 cap. So if you're boosting your NOI, say that 5% equates to $100,000, that's $2 million in net worth. I mean, that's real numbers. And I don't think people think that through a lot. And you are going to get to that point where if you are self-managing, you're going to need a coach, you're going to need a consultant like an Ian. And that's where, again, one more time, RevPro coach.
The RevOps coach.
The RevOps coach. I want to get clear on that. The RevOps coach.
Or on Instagram, the RevOps coach.
Yeah, hit him up, really, shoot him a message.
What I do is I do one-to-one, and you've actually done both, but I do one-to-one with clients where I'll come in and build it for you.
Yep.
But I also do, I had so many people that I was working with that were asking me to coach their operator. Mm-hmm. They wanted executive coaching for their director of ops, executive coaching for their COO. And I was like, man, this isn't scalable. Like, I can't just do executive coaching only on all these guys. I do executive coaching in that realm, but what I found was these guys, I'm having the same conversation over and over. Like, these guys have some of the same challenges. Yeah. And so what I've done is I've created a program for operators where the visionary, the business owner that wants to support their operator, whether they want to get him executive coaching or they want to help him within the business, but they don't know how. They're like, I'm not wired that way. I don't think that way. Like, I just want us to get to this end destination, but I don't know the playbook to give you to have you run, but I know you could if you had it. So basically the fork in the road I've created is if your operator's tapped out, he doesn't have capacity, you need to introduce new capacity, right? You need to introduce some additional person who can execute on that strategy and implementation. So that's where I come in one-to-one. The second option is if your operator has capacity and you're willing to go at his pace, then I create a program called Ops Academy. And coincidentally, I have a real estate cohort within that. It's essentially just an accelerator for operators where it's executive coaching, it's group coaching, they get access to interviews, things like that with other operators so they can become better operators. And so that's kind of the fork in the road. If you have an operator in place, you have to have an operator in place either way. But if you have an operator in place that needs help, you can just plug them into Ops Academy. You don't need me necessarily to step into your business. But if you're growing rapidly, your operator's already tapped out and you need to introduce new capacity and you still want to move quickly. I mean, it's one of the things that we talked about early on was I said, are you willing to go at their pace or do you want to go faster? And it was a little bit of a loaded. It was a little bit of a loaded question, right? That I knew the answer to. But yeah, it's like if you want to go faster, you need to introduce new capacity.
I want to be done yesterday.
That's where I can come in one-to-one versus if you have an operator that just needs a little support. Ops Academy is also a great option for them to get them some help without having to have me jump in full-time or part-time into the business.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for being here. Matt, thank you for being here. And thank you guys again for checking it out. And as always, bet on yourself.